So my name is Phil Storey. I am a housing attorney with VPLC. I run the Eviction Legal Helpline, which is a statewide resource for tenants facing potential eviction. I've been a legal aid lawyer for 12 years, and I've been at VPLC for 3 years. And I've had the pleasure of working with residents of manufactured home communities, or mobile home parks, sometimes called trailer parks, for basically my whole time as a legal aid attorney, but have been able to work with Joe for the last 4 years, really, starting when I was at Legal Aid Justice Center and then moving over to VPLC. Joe Ciszek is an attorney, housing law attorney with VPLC. He is our authority on the sort of the big picture of manufactured housing communities in Virginia, and some of the sort of structural issues and legal issues around making those more stable, more available, and work out better for tenants in the long run. So our neighbors. He's been working in mobile home communities for the last 5 years, since he was a law student and at University of Richmond. And it's great to have him. He's done more thinking about this than just about anybody in Virginia, as far as I know, and has a lot of good experience and good insights that he will share. I'm going to be a pretty hands-off moderator, so when Joe is done, if you want to do the little digital hand raising thing, or you can physically raise your hand if your camera's on, and I will choose you, or you can put a question in the chat. But I will now turn it over to Joe.
All right, thanks, Phil. So I'm Joe Ciszek, and I'm an attorney with VPLC, as Phil just said. I've been working in manufactured home community issues for a little while now, and it's been just a really an area that is ripe for advocacy, just because of the chasm in between what folks are entitled to, what the law provides for in some cases, and the actual experience of folks on the ground. And so as long as I've been working at this issue, I've been trying to come up with solutions both to the day-to-day issues that people are facing in mobile home parks. Oh, by the way, I'm going to switch terminology in and out. Manufactured home communities is my favorite term. Mobile home parks is, the most common one that I'm probably going to use. But I've been trying to find some solutions to the, the day-to-day issues, as well as trying to push for a new regime, a new legal regime, a new model of mobile home park in the Commonwealth that would create more structural fairness for these communities. So, that's sort of a preview of where we're going. But first, I just want to talk to folks a little bit about mobile home parks in general. I recognize a lot of the folks on this call. Good to see familiar names. So some of you I know are familiar, but for those who may not be, mobile home parks in Virginia offer a real promise to folks who live in them. It is a promise of affordability. It is a promise of community. It is a promise of self-determination. One of the most wonderful things I think about the mobile home park is that it is a totally unsubsidized form of affordable housing that allows people the opportunity to chart their own course, own their own home, but rent the land beneath it. And in doing so, you're not sharing a wall with a neighbor, but you are close enough to your neighbors that if you need help, you can call for them. I've been spending a lot of time on the ground in these communities. I don't like ivory tower policy making. I think it's best for people who are suggesting solutions to be where the problem is, and preferably for the solution to come from the folks who are affected by the problem. And so I've been talking with people throughout my time working on this issue, spending as much time in the communities as I can, doing surveys and interviewing people, as well as providing direct legal assistance when needed. The promise of mobile homes is great. It has a bad rap a lot of the time from people who are ignorant of what the experience is like to live in a mobile home park. Certainly some are nicer than others, as you would expect in any neighborhood. But the model itself offers some great benefits. And it also, however, has some current legal drawbacks. So the issues that these communities face, there's a variety of different sources of them, and I'm going to try and keep us focused on the issues that are addressable with the type of work that VPLC does. Fundamentally, I think there is a structural inequity between the owners of the mobile home park, that is the land with dirt and hookups for folks to rent, and the people themselves who frequently own the home, are totally responsible for repairs within and without the home, but do pay a fairly low monthly rent rate just to have a space to put it. That does create the affordability in part, but it also can create some issues. So Virginia's Manufactured Home Lot Rental Act is basically the analog to our Virginia residential, the VRLTA, Virginia Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. And it shares some familiarities that I think don't really make sense. It treats renting a lot as being pretty akin to renting an apartment or a home or something like that, when really the risk that the landlord takes on is of an entire different nature in a mobile home park. There is some upkeep that's required, and there are some oversight that the landlord has to provide. But fundamentally, the landlord does not stand to lose as much by tenants who don't pay the rent. The tenant is the one who's responsible for making sure that the home is how it should be. The fact of the matter is that a lot of these, so-called mobile homes are not very mobile at all. It can cost between $6,000 and $12,000 to move a mobile home, if the mobile home can even be moved. Unfortunately, some of the aging stock of these mobile homes, it's just not a possibility for the home to be moved. So you have a situation where someone owns their home and they want to invest in their home. They want to live somewhere where they're happy to live. Who doesn't? And I've seen a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into making their home a good place to live for them. But they are still beholden to the person who they are renting the plot from. The issue there, as I see it, is multifold. There are numerous issues with that. So, for example, if the landlord wished to simply not renew the lease, that's an option. So you own your home, you've been spending all your free time and free capital, as little as it may be, and fixing it up, and then the landlord says, well, I've just decided with no needed reason at all that you do not get to live here anymore. And the person has to try and sell their home really quickly, often taking a huge loss, or depending on the shady happenings that may be, they might end up leaving the home without being able to find a purchaser. I've unfortunately seen landlords who interfere with the selling process, and what that leads to, and a problem I've seen in numerous parks that I've been talking to folks in, is one way or another, the landlord has the owner of the home leave the park, and then essentially repossesses or takes the home and turns around and sells it as a profit. And that is pretty disgusting behavior, I think. I think it's very unfortunate that that our system allows for that possibility, and it can be totally above board. Now, certainly, there's also an opportunity for it not to be, and that is in and of itself an issue. The other main source of issues beyond, those sort of ones that are inherent to this power imbalance would be the existential threats that a lot of these communities are facing. There are redevelopment pressures, and there's a wave of private equity investor owners who are purchasing these communities right now. There's, if some of you may be familiar, John Oliver on his Last Week Tonight program did a piece a couple of years back now, one or two at this point, on this particular issue. These folks that are who are these organizations that are buying up mobile home parks and squeezing them for all that they're worth. There are also because of course, if you can't leave your home, or if you can't move your home, or if it is financially prohibitive, then you are a very consistent source of revenue. Even if the landlord raises the rent ever increasingly higher, you have folks who are choosing between medicine and housing costs, just because they've sunk so much into their home. And a home that is, can be and often is, a good place to live. It could be better, but there are a lot that are excellent. But anyways, this existential threat, some of the purchasing of these parks is by folks who want to redevelop it into more economically productive use of the land. And in doing so, will take out huge communities of affordable housing. And oftentimes, this has been noticed more and more by localities that, it might be one of the largest sources of affordable housing in your locality. And for it to just disappear without any, meaningful replacement is a real tragedy. So those are some of the issues that these communities face. The solutions that we're proposing, a long-term solution that I've been working on since I've been here, is bringing community ownership of these parks to Virginia. It's a model that's worked really well in other states across the country, resident-owned communities. So there's an organization called ROC USA, ROC, Resident-Owned Communities, that works on this issue nationally, but there's also other organizations as well. But this model where the residents collectively own the land, but still individually own their home, gets rid of a lot of the structural inequities that are in place. Certainly, you're not going to squeeze all the residents for all that they're worth by raising the rent as much as you possibly can if, it's your own rent. Similarly, you're not going to, tear down your community to build a strip mall when you live there. The lot rent currently, while it does go to service mortgages and to, provide for the community oversight, a lot of that is just, pure profit. That could be reinvested back into the community if it was community owned. So that is a long-term goal of ours. We're working towards that in a number of different ways. A couple of years back, we got a notice of sale provision passed because before that, folks didn't even know if the park was going to be sold. Now they have the opportunity to know about that and to try and put in a bid. We hope to take that further in the future. We did just get that passed, so politically, we'll see when and how that takes another step. But there's a lot being done on the back end to prepare communities for that. Nonprofit ownership is something that is a good interim, a good steward of the land until the folks can take ownership, and we're promoting that in other ways as well. With the last little bit of my intro section here, I do want to talk about new legislation that we're proposing for the next General Assembly. This new legislation has several important features, but the ones that I think are really important, one would be for owner-occupied homes, people who own their home but just rent the land. It would require a cause for non-renewal of the lease. The landlord couldn't just not renew on a whim. They would have to have good reason, something tantamount to cause for an eviction in order to not renew the lease of someone who owns their home. And I think that falls more in line with where the financial and risk incentives are in this model. Similarly, that won't really be effective if the landlord can double, triple, quadruple the rent selectively to get people out. So one part of that legislation we're proposing is a modest cap on rent increases for folks who are owning their home in a mobile home park, so that the landlord cannot unreasonably push them out through greater profit seeking. And then another component of this that I think is very important is that we're trying to tighten up the penalties provision in the Manufactured Home Lot Rental Act. Right now, there's a lot of the Manufactured Home Lot Rental Act that are illusory rights, rights without a remedy. You have the ability to, there's all these protections about what landlords can and can't do in the park, what they can and can't put in your lease. But the enforcement of those is slim to none. Some of them, there is no remedy at all. Some of them, the current penalties provision, you can sue for 1 month's rent, which in a lot of these communities will be maybe $400 to $500. That makes it a very easy choice for the landlord to just, lump that into the cost of business. If, the amount of the penalty for violating the law is so slim. So we're looking to expand the amount of penalty and also bring more things under the umbrella of the penalty provision to ensure that the rights that people are supposed to have are actually being carried out. Because as I've seen in these communities, it's more or less the Wild West. No one's really looking, and landlords mostly do what they'd like. That's not the case universally, of course, and the advocacy that's happened in some communities recently across the state has been awe-inspiring. But on the whole, there are a lot of these communities where, it just doesn't make sense for the residents to try and exert their rights, which is very unfortunate to see as a legal aid attorney. So that's generally what I see as, some of the issues in these communities. And I've been talking with folks for a while, and they've wanted to see, things like for cause, lease non-renewal, limitations on how much a landlord can raise their rent year over year, to something reasonable. We know that, landlords, they have an ownership of this, but anyways, they have their needs and they're legitimate, but there needs to be a rebalancing, and that's what we're working on now. But yeah, so I'd be happy to take some questions.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Let me start with some questions that people have put in the chat. Related to the most recent stuff that you were mentioning about the policy issues, one of the things that was a comment from Michelle Crocker about the need for maybe correcting or closing some loopholes or having some other opportunities that are not currently reflected. So in terms of, in the legislation, in terms of giving notice when a park is for sale or has received an offer for sale, right now the notice goes to the Department of Housing and Community Development, but it is not forwarded to the locality. So there are localities that would like to protect and preserve their manufactured home communities, but they don't even know when a sale is to, say, an out-of-state, a hedge fund or something like that. And so that would be something that that is an opportunity to kind of increase the options there for protection. But
yeah, just a quick comment on that. Yeah. I mean, so, notice goes to DHCD, which goes on this big, massive list. But I hear what you're saying, and I think it would be beneficial for localities to specifically be notified, because they have, a lot to gain or lose depending on how the sales go. and a lot of interest in preserving affordable housing in their areas.
And let's actually go ahead, Michelle, if you wanted to follow up on that.
I just want to say quickly that this is a real example that happened in Fairfax County. And to your point about enforcement and protections, the county was 30 days late in finding out about this. So very frustrating for any jurisdiction not to know. I think it's probably more important to go to the locality first and then have them forwarded on to DHCD. I understand the need for some sort of master list and accounting, but I'm hoping that this is a tweak that can be added to this legislation and passed in the coming General Assembly year. Thanks.
Thank you. So another question about this situation of investors. So when investors are buying these parks, if they are looking to put them to a different use, develop them for some other use, do any of these communities count as low-income housing that might require investors to replace the units of low-income housing? My guess is that would be a local sort of requirement rather than a state law issue.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you're right there. There's, it's not treated as, other forms of, low-income housing tax credit or anything like that. There's no, need at the state level that I'm aware of to replace them. But, the localities may have, their own rules. But I know that, that is something that I think localities should be more involved in. I've seen where localities are able to, require the developer to ameliorate some of the fallout that's going to come from closing one of these communities. And it can be related to creation of affordable housing elsewise, or, particular benefits to the residents who are living there. And that's where there's an opportunity for folks to get involved and, make it very clear to your local policymakers that they need to put some strings on a change of use for that. And while there are some limitations on what those localities can put as strings, it is a very valuable advocacy method. There. By the way, we don't have too much time and I've seen a lot of comments pop up. I'm going to respond by email to folks who have included those comments or the questions that we haven't, that we're not going to be able to get to today. But just wanted to put that up there so that people know that I see and I take it seriously. Thank you.
Another thing is that we did get passed in the last General Assembly, I believe, a requirement that when localities are revising their planning, their long-term plans for development, they have to include some reference to preserving manufactured home communities, right?
Right, and so that gives community advocates something to point to, because then when the locality says we value preserving these communities, you can say, locality, you have stated your own values to be preserving these communities. Put your money where your mouth is, and let's get something in place to preserve this community, have it not close, deny a change of use, or if it must go forward, create real meaningful amelioration of the problem.
Yeah. So another question about this sort of end of the issue of potential redevelopment and sale. So how realistic is it for mobile home park residents to be able to raise the funds to actually bid on a park and be able to purchase it?
Yeah, so increasingly, I guess would be the way to say that. It is a huge undertaking, and residents without support are going to have an incredible uphill battle. There are loan products being developed right now to help folks make those bids. Additionally, there's a nonprofit called the Manufactured Home Community Coalition of Virginia that I sit on the board of, and it is working to have a technical assistance provider come to Virginia to help make these financial transactions happen. it's something that is a very necessary step, and we're working on somewhat indirectly, but that's why I mentioned that I think a steward of the land, being a nonprofit who perhaps already has a good relationship with loan servicers, could be a temporary step to get folks up to speed on what it'll take to run the park, and then hand it off to them. And I think that model, we don't know for sure that that's the way it's going to go, but in Chesterfield, there was a community known as Bermuda Estates that was purchased by a local nonprofit who has indicated that they'd be willing to take that step if that's what the client, or if that's what the community wanted in the far future, or not in the far future, but in the future. And so I think that that is a more realistic way to get these things transferred. I do think that nonprofit ownership is not the same solution as community ownership, and that community ownership is the goal. But I think that there may be there's increasing supports for folks, and right now the solution is partnering with a nonprofit at least, but that's definitely an area of concern that we're trying to make more accessible for the community members, because putting in a multi-million-dollar bid when you're just a community member, I say just, but when you're a community member who has not bid on a multi-million-dollar property, can be difficult.
Okay, so it is 9:28, so we're going to move to the lightning round, we'll call this. But next, Marianella, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, it will be great to have a policy that if an owner of a mobile home park wants to sell it, it should be, and if the people who live there have the money, or make a partnership with a nonprofit, it will be great if the owner sells if the owner has, like, let's say 3 offers, his priority will be selling the park to the people who lives there, because that's the case that we have right now in Harmony Place, and the community right now is doing a partnership with 2 nonprofits, but the owner already have an offer. So it's like we have the money, the community has the money, but we don't know, even though we have the 25%, we don't know if the owner is going to sell the property to us, because to the community, because there is no a policy that say you must sell this to the people who lives there. So basically is in her hands, the owner hands. So even though the people have the money.
Right. Yeah. So that so we've tried to push for for preference being given to communities that are trying to purchase it before, and I think that that's absolutely correct. I would love to see that here in Virginia. It's something that we do prioritize. We want to have the folks in the community, if they're able to get the money together, they should be able to purchase the property. Politically, that's a little bit difficult, but we are trying to make that happen. We're also trying to make, we're also trying to incentivize in other ways. So we're considering proposals to incentivize selling to community members, such as tax incentives, where the landlord, if they get 2 identical offers and one is from the tenants and one is from an investor, if there were financial incentives tax-wise for them to choose the tenants, that might be a way to encourage it without forcing it. But I agree that forcing it and giving them a right to purchase their own community is the solution that would be best to fit that. There's some issues, but sorry, super brief. But no, you're right on, and we do need that. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get it soon, but we're working towards that goal, and incrementally, solutions along the way.
All right, so it is 9:30, so we understand we are respectful of your time. If you need to get off, feel free right now. If you want to email us with other questions, you can. And as Joe said, we'll try to email and answer some of the questions that we haven't answered yet. We're going to stick around for another 15 minutes or so. So feel free to stay with us. One question about what percentage of mobile home park residents own their homes versus renting their homes in Virginia?
Oh, sorry. So we don't have actual data on that because honestly, we don't even know where all the mobile home parks are in Virginia. It's statutorily defined as 5 or more, lots for rent on a contiguous property of land. We've tried to get something along that passed previously just to, create a study of it. Anecdotally, I've spent time in a couple dozen parks in all various parts of the state. It varies by parks. Some parks, I would say, the majority of folks rent, but those are the exception. Generally speaking, most folks seem to own the home, or rather, the majority of folks in most parks that I've been to own the home but rent the land. It's not universal.
Yeah, my guess is probably like 80%.
That rings true to my experience.
Yeah. Okay, so one question that we had in here was legally, how are owners allowed to take possession of the home that has been, say, abandoned and resell it?
Yeah, so there's a legal route and a less than legal route, and I see the less than legal route being followed very frequently. The legal route is at the DMV, so mobile homes are titled through the DMV as if they were a car, even though they're a house. And there is an abandoned vehicle process that the landlord can go through in order to get the title transferred to them. Unfortunately, in my experience, I've seen that in many cases, landlords will repossess and resell a home without actually going through the process of getting legal title, which I think is fraud. But that is hard to address when we don't know that it's happening. There is a legal process for that. If you leave your couch at your apartment after you vacate, that's abandoned property. Similarly, if you leave your entire home on the lot that you were renting when you leave, that is abandoned. It's really unfortunate that it makes sense to an extent, but there's an issue there. We've pushed for and gotten policy changes that make it so that if you're evicted, you can still rent out your home. So we're trying to reduce the number of opportunities for landlords to reclaim these homes, claim ownership of someone else's home. But unfortunately, it does still happen.
So I would say in my experience too, that so there are very nice mobile home parks and there are less nice mobile home parks. And some of the sort of older mobile home parks with older homes in them, they're a gray market in a lot of ways. So even the rightful owners of the home, but frequently enough, the title has just been lost somewhere in the chain of ownership. And so they're selling their home to somebody in good faith that really is their home, but they sell it to somebody without the title. And so this is something that park owners, we've seen a lot of park owners who just do the same thing, and they can sort of, rinse and repeat this whole cycle over and over again. And it is I think it's a level 5 misdemeanor to sell a vehicle without owning the title. That's a maximum of $500 fine and no jail time. So there really are not incentives to keep them from doing this. But and then the way Joe was explaining it, the gray market extends to the leases and to what landlords can get away with in terms of how they operate their park and the charges and things like that. So that's why there's a real need to get ownership eventually into the hands of the folks who live there, who have the incentives aligned with keeping it a livable and a good community. All right, any other questions? People can feel free to unmute yourself and blurt things out if you want. We're at that point, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's a fair number, or I think there were some other questions that we haven't gotten to from the chat. Someone mentioned emailing the whole group. I think that's something that we're willing to do, right? I mean, I'm happy to. I just don't want to spam people with information. So I'll probably send a follow-up email addressing the number of questions that we've gotten. Sort of.
So the other thing that has been something that I have been sort of dreaming about for a decade, and that we, both Joe and I and VPLC, and when I was working at LAJC, have been working on, is I think every manufactured home community should have a residents association. And if you have a residents association, and one of the things we were able to do a couple of years ago was there was a mobile home park that had recently been sold to an out-of-state investor. And that out-of-state investor came in and said, hey, here's your new lease, sign it, or you're in trouble. And the residents association, which we had actually helped them form a residents association a couple of years before. It had gone dormant, and we helped them revive that, and then negotiate lease terms with this new owner. And they actually got some pretty good concessions from the owner for the terms of the lease, things that cap the increase in rents for the next several years, other sort of policies about extra charges and about rules and things like that. And so that was a real opportunity that, of course, is never going to happen with just individual residents, trying to negotiate a lease on their own. And so both in terms of just the community's ability to avoid being exploited by landowners, but also their ability to, say, apply for grants for little projects, or to get the attention of law enforcement or municipality officials or things like that. That's something that I think every manufactured home community should have in the long run. So, okay, so one question, what options are available to the Latino community, many of whom live in these mobile home communities, but are often taken advantage of due to language barriers and legal status? So when it was probably like 6 or 7 years ago, that the city of Richmond decided to very aggressively enforce the maintenance code against mobile home parks specifically. And those mobile home parks are like 75% Latino, right? In the city of Richmond. The city as a whole is like 7% Latino. Thankfully, a local nonprofit who had good relationships with the community got in touch with me. I was at Legal Aid Justice Center at the time. We were able to get involved, try to advocate with the city to take a more balanced approach that didn't just condemn a whole bunch of homes and make a bunch of people homeless. We ended up having to, there were a lot of things that we did. We started up what eventually became now the Manufactured Housing Community Coalition of Virginia, was started as part of that advocacy for these residents in Richmond. But we ended up having to file a HUD complaint and a federal fair housing lawsuit against the city. It's difficult, and definitely a lot of Latino immigrants are there. That's where where they find their most affordable and reasonable housing options. And so that's definitely something to be careful of, and to try to reach out to them and make these rights real for them. But the residents association in this one mobile home park that renegotiated their lease, that is, like, I would say well, probably right now, the Residents Association is probably 100% Latino, but the community is 95% Latino. So it is, organizing is definitely an important way, because the laws are really pretty weak for protecting people's rights.
Yeah, but as Phil was talking about, there may be a way to address some of these issues through fair housing complaints, administratively or otherwise. So you can talk to your local legal aid. Unfortunately, it can be very difficult, time consuming, et cetera, to bring a fair housing complaint, but it should be a solution to some of these issues where there's a pattern and practice of discrimination, or where there is a policy that has a disparate impact on folks based on national origin or race, et cetera. So there could be some solutions there. I do want to just mention real quick, there was a question about earlier. It said, is there any proposed legislation in the works to address that? At the time, we were talking about this issue of landlords who are taking homes and selling them. That one is really, I think that's a lot more about sunshine on the issue rather than legislation on the issue, because right now there are some ways to deal with that. Like I said, it could very well be a fraudulent sale. It could very well be a misdemeanor, as Phil was saying. There are some solutions there, but a lot of folks, they're already operating in that gray space. They don't realize that they may have a claim. Phil and I previously developed sort of a toolkit for folks who are selling their mobile homes to try and make sure that they're not going to be taken advantage of in all of this. But I think just getting more awareness to the community that they do have rights. And I try to do know your rights presentations and such, and I'm happy to partner with organizations across the state to put on presentations of that sort. But unfortunately, I hear of these things after they've happened to folks who are no longer around, and it's very frustrating when I'm in these communities talking to people. They're like, oh yeah, this is what just happened to all these people. This is what happened, and it's hard to pick up the pieces sometimes, and folks don't bring it to the attention of advocates. And so I don't know that it's necessarily a legislative solution. But yeah, I mean, I think that, there is a big issue with a lot of the protections that are already in place not being enforced well. So for example, if a landlord is selling 3 or more mobile homes in a rolling 12-month period, they're required to register as a dealer of mobile homes with the state. I don't know almost any who do that, but it's hard to get data on that unless the community is keeping track. So unfortunately, it has to do with capacity and knowing about these issues to being able to address them with the tools that already exist in a lot of cases.
So it is 9:45. So I think we will go ahead and wrap up. The questions have kind of petered out. We will go ahead and email answers to these questions to everybody who joined this, and feel free to email Joe any questions. His email address is just joe@vplc.org, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be happy to, he'll be happy to respond. Thank you for joining us, though. Tony, do you have any closing well wishes or anything?
Yeah, I don't. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining. You'll receive an email notification later when the video is on YouTube. Everyone have a wonderful, here in Richmond, very sunny and warm Thursday. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.